The divorce agreement sat on the glass table between us like a grenade with the pin already pulled. I'd had my lawyer drafted. Clean, simple. $2 million, one-time payment, no ongoing obligations, a generous offer for 3 years of marriage that had outlived its usefulness. I watched Eleanor read it. She'd been reading for 10 minutes now, her finger tracing each line like she was looking for a hidden trap. The afternoon sun caught the edges of her hair, the same gold that had drawn me to her at that party 12 years ago when she was still just another rich girl with a trust fund and a pretty smile. She set the paper down. $2 million. You heard the terms. I leaned back, crossing my arms. It's more than fair. No. She picked up my pen. It's not enough. I watched her add as 0.2 million became 20 million. She slid it back across the table with the same steady hands she'd used to hold the wine glass at our wedding reception. Steady hands that had never once wavered even when I'd been drunk and cruel and every other version of the man she'd married and regretted. 20 million, I repeated. You're insane. Maybe, she smiled, and it wasn't the smile I'd fallen in love with. IT was colder, harder. The smile of someone who'd already done the math and knew she had the upper hand. But I'm also right, and you know it. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her she'd never earned a dime of that money, that she'd married me because her father had told her to, that everything she owed to my family, but I couldn't. Because she was right. When we'd met, I'd been nothing. The bastard son of a man who died without acknowledging me, scrambling to hold onto a company that everyone else had written off. I'd had a name that was worthless and a reputation that was worse, and Eleanor's father had given me everything I needed. Money, connections, legitimacy. I'd taken it all, and I'd married his daughter as part of the deal. I hated that she knew. I hated that she'd always known, that she'd never pretended otherwise, that she'd married me with her eyes wide open while I'd spent 3 years pretending she was just another transaction. You have 24 hours to sign, she said, standing. Or I'll take this to a judge and make sure the whole world knows how the great Christopher Sterling got his start. She walked out of the room without looking back. I spent the rest of the day drinking. The penthouse was too quiet without her. IT had been quiet for months. Actually, ever since I'd stopped pretending to care about the marriage. Bella was the reason for that, of course, Bella and her perfect smile, and the way she looked at me like I was the most important person in the world. But Bella was at her apartment tonight, waiting for me to finalize the divorce, so we could start our real life together. And I was here, surrounded by the remnants of a marriage I'd never really wanted, drinking whiskey I'd paid for with Eleanor's father's money. My phone buzzed. Bella, did she sign? I stared at the message for a long moment. Me. She wants more. Bella, more? More than 2 million? Christopher, that's insane. She's just trying to punish you for leaving her. Don't let her win. I looked at the ceiling. The chandelier had been her choice. The art on the walls had been her choice. The furniture had been her choice. I'd been so busy building my empire that I'd let her build our home, and now the home was hers, and I was the intruder. She had the high ground, and she knew it. I signed the new agreement at midnight. My hand didn't shake, and my handwriting didn't waver. I signed it the way I signed every contract, quickly, efficiently, without emotion. And then I sent it to my lawyer and told him to process the payment. I expected to feel relieved. Instead, I felt something I couldn't name: loss, regret. No, it was simpler than that. It was the knowledge that I'd just paid $20 million to end a marriage I should have ended 3 years ago. The courthouse was cold. Institutional, we sat in separate chairs, not touching, not looking, not speaking. The clerk called our number, and Eleanor walked in ahead of me, her heels clicking against the floor like she was walking into a boardroom instead of a courtroom. We stood in front of the judge. He was young, bored, processing divorces like they were inventory. Do you understand the terms of this agreement? He asked her. I do. And you agree to them willingly? I do. The judge looked at me. Mr. Sterling, do you understand the terms? I do. He stamped the papers. Divorce granted. Next case. And just like that, 3 years ended with the sound of a rubber stamp and the weight of $20 million. When we walked out of the courthouse, Bella was waiting on the steps. She was wearing a white sundress and a smile I'd bought with the money I hadn't given Eleanor. The way she looked at me, like I was the center of her world, it was the only thing that made the day bearable. Christopher. She rushed toward me, her hands on my chest, her face bright with victory. It's done. We're free. I let her kiss me, but I was watching Eleanor. She was walking down the steps, her head high, her shoulders straight. She didn't look back. She didn't cry. She didn't show a single sign of the woman I'd married. That was the moment I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. But I didn't know how terrible. Not until 3 weeks later, when Eleanor's lawyer called me to confirm the payment. Not until I heard the news that she'd moved to a new apartment, started a new studio, and reconnected with someone from her past, someone who made her smile in a way she'd never smiled with me. I heard about it from a mutual friend, the kind of gossip that traveled through circles I'd stopped belonging to. She's happy, the friend said. Like, genuinely happy. Not the fake kind she used to put on for your family dinners. I didn't believe it, not at first, but then I saw the photos. Eleanor at a charity gala, laughing at something off camera, her hand resting on the arm of a man I'd never met. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Jealousy. The man's name was Ian Hayes. He was younger than me, better looking, and he'd known Eleanor long before I ever met her. They'd been neighbors once, children together, and he'd never stopped loving her. I learned all of this from a private investigator I hired. I told myself it was because I needed to make sure she wasn't going to try to take more money, but the truth was darker than that. The truth was that I'd never really let her go. I told myself I wanted a divorce, that Bella was the one I loved, that Eleanor was just a stepping stone to a better life. But the moment she'd stopped fighting for me, the moment she'd signed those papers without a single tear, I'd felt like I'd been punched in the chest. I was a fool. I was an arrogant, selfish fool who'd thrown away the only woman who'd ever really seen me. And now I was going to have to live with it. I called her a week after I found out about Ian. It was late, past midnight, and I'd been drinking. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. Christopher? Eleanor. I struggled to keep my voice steady. I need to see you. It's 2 a.m. I know, but I can't stop thinking about you. About us. About everything we threw away. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that cut through the phone like glass. You threw it away, not me. You and Bella and your midlife crisis. Eleanor. I'm pregnant, Christopher. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Not yours. I know you're going to say that's a problem, but it's not. It's not your problem, and it's not your concern. She was giving me an out. She was telling me I didn't have to care, that I could walk away guilt-free. But the jealousy that flooded through me had nothing to do with guilt. Who? My voice was shaking. Who got you pregnant? That's not your business. I'm making it my business. Who is he? She hung up without answering. The next day, I found out. Ian Hayes, the neighbor, the childhood friend, the man who'd been waiting for his moment and had gotten it the night Eleanor had been at her lowest. I called my lawyer. I called my investigator. I called everyone I could think of, trying to find a way to stop it. But there was nothing to stop. She'd moved on. She'd found someone else. And I'd done nothing but push her toward him. The truth was simple and brutal and entirely my fault. I'd fallen in love with Eleanor somewhere along the way. Not at the beginning. Not when I'd married her for her father's money and her family's name. But somewhere between the arguments and the reconciliations, the late nights and the early mornings, I'd started needing her in a way I'd never needed anyone. And I'd been too proud to admit it. So I'd pushed her away. I'd found Bella, convinced myself the affair meant I was in control. I'd given Eleanor an ultimatum, forced her to walk away, and told myself I was glad to be free. But I wasn't free. I just lost the only person who'd ever made me want to be better. I went to Bella's apartment the night I found out about the pregnancy. She was cooking dinner, humming to herself, already planning the wedding she'd been dreaming about since the day we'd met. Christopher. She smiled when she saw me. I was just thinking about you. I want to talk about the ceremony. I was thinking maybe a garden wedding with white flowers and... Bella, we need to talk. She saw it in my face. The change. The decision I'd already made. Christopher, what's wrong? I can't do this, I said. I can't marry you. She stared at me, her face going pale. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that I've spent the last year pretending I was in love with you when I was really still in love with her. Her. Bella's voice rose, sharp and high. Eleanor? The woman you divorced? The woman you paid $20 million to get rid of. I know how it sounds. I know I'm the worst person in the world. But I can't. I can't keep pretending. She threw a plate at me. It shattered against the wall behind my head. And then she started screaming, and I walked out of the door and didn't look back. I showed up at Eleanor's apartment the next morning. She opened the door, saw my face, and shook her head. Christopher, what are you doing here? I need to tell you something. I don't want to hear it. Please. I stepped toward her, my heart hammering in my chest. Please, Eleanor, just give me 5 minutes. She stared at me for a long moment, then stepped aside and let me in. The words came out in a rush. I told her I'd been an idiot. I told her I'd been a coward. I told her I'd spent 3 years pretending I didn't love her because I was too afraid to admit she was the best thing that had ever happened to me. I'm sorry, I said. I'm sorry for the affair. I'm sorry for the divorce. I'm sorry for everything I did to push you away. She listened to it all without saying a word. And then she said, Christopher, did you ever stop to think that maybe you just don't want to be the one who got left behind? That you're not really in love with me. You're just too competitive to lose? I opened my mouth to argue, but she kept going. I loved you, and I loved you so much I let you destroy me. And you did. You broke me in ways I'm still trying to repair. And now you come back, after everything, because you can't stand the idea that I've moved on. Eleanor, I know I don't deserve. No, she said. You really don't, but that's not why I'm saying no. Then why? She looked at me, and I saw it in her eyes. The finality. The end. Because I'm finally happy, Christopher, and I'm not going to let you take that away from me. I walked out of her apartment and never went back. The divorce was final. The marriage was over. And I'd spent 3 years chasing something I'd already had and thrown away. I sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel, and I realized the worst part. This wasn't a story about a man who'd made a mistake and learned from it. This was a story about a man who'd had everything and thrown it away for nothing. Because Eleanor had been right. I'd never loved Bella. I'd never loved anyone. I'd just been too afraid to admit that I was a lonely, selfish, broken man who didn't know how to let himself be loved. And now I was going to have to live with that. I spent the next week drinking myself into a stupor. It was a stupid thing to do. Stupid and self-destructive and exactly the kind of behavior that had driven Eleanor away in the first place. But I couldn't stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Every time I stopped moving, I heard her voice. Every time I tried to sleep, I relived the moment she told me she was pregnant with another man's child. Bella called me 43 times. I counted them from my phone's log, each one a small monument to my failure. She left voicemails that started angry, turned pleading, and ended in tears. I didn't listen to any of them. I didn't have the strength. The first time I saw Eleanor after the divorce, she was walking out of a coffee shop with Ian Hayes. She was smiling, not the tight, controlled smile she'd worn for the last year of our marriage, but something real, something that reached her eyes. She was holding his hand, and he was looking at her like she was the only woman in the world. I was sitting in my car across the street, watching them like a stalker. I knew it was pathetic. I knew I should have driven away, but I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. Ian said something that made her laugh. She tilted her head back, her hair catching a light, and for a moment, she looked exactly like the woman I'd fallen in love with at that party 12 years ago. The woman I'd married. The woman I'd destroyed. And then he kissed her. A soft, gentle kiss that said more than words ever could. I started the car and drove away. Bella showed up at my penthouse 3 days later. She'd let herself in somehow. I must have given her a key at some point, or maybe she'd never returned it. Either way, she was standing in my living room when I stumbled out of the bedroom, hungover and disheveled. Christopher. Her voice was flat. You look terrible. You look angry. Because I'm not, right? I'm just your backup plan. The woman you used to make Eleanor jealous. Bella. Don't. She held up her hand. I've had 3 days to think about this. 3 days to process the fact that the man I was going to marry still loves his ex-wife. And you know what I realized? I waited. I realized I don't blame you. She laughed, but it was bitter. I don't blame you because I knew what I was signing up for from the beginning. You never loved me, Christopher. You never even pretended to love me. You just wanted someone who would make you feel like you were in control, and I was stupid enough to let you. I opened my mouth to apologize, but she cut me off. I'm not here for an apology. I'm here to tell you that I'm done. I'm done being your side piece. I'm done being the woman you settle for when the woman you really want won't have you. I'm moving to Chicago next week. I've already got a job and an apartment, and I'm not going to call you when I get there. She walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. Eleanor didn't just fall into Ian's arms. He was there for her. When you were out with me, when you were ignoring her, when you were making her feel like she was nothing, he was there. He was the one holding her hand at the hospital when she thought she was dying. I felt the blood drain from my face. What are you talking about? Pancreatic cancer, Christopher. She was diagnosed a year ago. She didn't tell you because she thought you'd use it against her. And when she was going through treatment, she was alone. Because you were with me. The floor seemed to shift beneath my feet. I'd heard the words. I'd processed them. But I couldn't make them fit into the picture I had of the past year. Eleanor had been sick. Eleanor had been going through treatment. And I'd been so wrapped up in my own affairs that I hadn't noticed. Who else knew? I asked. Her father, just a few friends, and Ian. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He's the one who drove her to appointments. He's the one who sat with her during chemo. He's the one who held her hand when she thought she was going to die. And you were too busy buying me dinner and pretending you were happy. She walked out of the door and closed it behind her. I didn't drink that night. I sat on my couch, staring at the wall, replaying every moment of the past year in my head. The fights, the silences, the nights I'd come home late and found her asleep on the couch, waiting for me. I remembered a conversation we'd had about 6 months ago. She'd been pale, thinner than usual, and I'd asked if she was okay. I'm fine, she'd said. Just tired. It's nothing. I hadn't pushed. I'd taken her at her word. I'd been so eager to believe that everything was fine that I'd accepted her dismissal without a second thought. She'd been dying, or at least, she thought she was dying. And I'd been too busy falling in love with someone else to notice. The next day, I went to see her father. He lived in a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, the same house where Eleanor had grown up. I'd spent countless hours in that living room, making deals and pretending I was part of the family, but today, I was standing on the doorstep like a stranger. He opened the door and stared at me with cold, flat eyes. You're the last person I expected to see. I know I don't have the right to be here. He stepped aside and let me in. The living room hadn't changed. The same furniture, the same paintings, the same photographs on the mantelpiece. But I wasn't the same man who'd sat on this couch 12 years ago, promising to take care of his daughter. Eleanor's been through a lot, her father said. More than you know. Bella told me about the cancer. He nodded slowly. She was diagnosed a year ago. The doctors caught it early, thank God. She's in remission now, but it was a close thing. There were times when we didn't think she'd make it. I felt my throat tighten. Why didn't she tell me? Because she knew you wouldn't care. His voice was flat. Matter of fact. And because she didn't want your pity. She'd already had enough of that from you. I took a breath. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I need to see her. I need to apologize. She doesn't want to see you. Please, just 5 minutes. He looked at me for a long time. I could see the struggle on his face, the desire to protect his daughter warring with something else. Maybe hope, maybe the belief that people could change. She's at the house, he said finally. The house you bought her. She never sold it. I drove to the address I'd never forgotten. It was a small Victorian on a quiet street, the kind of house Eleanor had always dreamed of owning. I bought it for her as an anniversary gift, back when I still pretended to care she'd kept it. Of course she had. Ian's car was in the driveway. I sat in my own car for a long time, watching the house. The lights were on. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. And I could feel the weight of everything I'd done pressing down on me like a physical force. I got out of the car and walked up to the front door. I rang the bell. Ian answered. He was younger than me, better looking, with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to fight for anything. I hated him on sight. She doesn't want to see you, he said. I know, but I need to. She's sleeping. She had a long day. He stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind him. And I'm not going to let you disturb her. Look, I know you think you're protecting her. I'm not thinking, I'm doing. He stepped closer, his eyes sharp. I've been doing it for a year. While you were off chasing other women, I was the one who held her hand at the hospital. I was the one who made sure she ate. I was the one who stayed when she got the phone call that the treatment was working. He paused. So don't pretend you care now, not when it's too late. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that I did care, that I'd always cared, that I'd just been too stupid to show it. But the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. I'm not going to give up on her, I said. You don't have to give up on her. You just have to let her go. He shook his head. She deserves better than you, Christopher. She always did. I drove home in a daze. The penthouse was empty, cold. It had always been cold. I just never noticed until now. I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture she'd picked out, the art she'd hung on the walls. I'd never appreciated any of it. I'd taken it all for granted. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. I know what you did, Christopher, and I know what you're planning. Stay away from her. I stared at the screen. It was signed with a single initial. I. Ian had found my number, or maybe Eleanor had given it to him. Either way, the message was clear. I was done. I'd lost, and there was no coming back from it. The next week, I got the final blow. It came in the form of an invitation in the mail, a small, elegant card with gold lettering. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Eleanor Hayes and Ian Hayes. I stared at the card for a long time. Then I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. She'd taken his name. She'd taken his love. She'd taken everything I'd thrown away and made it hers. And I'd given it all to her, not deliberately, not with intention, but by being the kind of man who didn't know how to love until it was too late. I didn't go to the wedding. I couldn't. I sat in my apartment, the curtains drawn, the whiskey flowing, and I tried to forget. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Every time I tried to sleep, I heard her voice. Eleanor had moved on. She'd found someone who deserved her, and I was left with nothing but the echo of a love I'd never known how to hold. The lesson was simple and brutal. I'd spent my whole life chasing things I didn't have: money, power, respect. And I'd lost the only thing that had ever mattered. 3 years after Eleanor's wedding, I finally stopped drinking. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't a moment of clarity. It was just exhaustion, the kind that comes when you've been running from yourself for so long that you forget what you're running from. I'd sold the penthouse, moved to a smaller place, kept my head down at work, and let the business run itself. I'd stopped checking Eleanor's social media, stopped asking mutual friends about her, stopped torturing myself with the ghost of what I'd lost. Or so I told myself. The charity gala was a bore. I'd only come because my board had insisted, something about networking, about rebuilding my reputation after the divorce. I'd spent the evening shaking hands and making small talk, my smile fixed in place like a mask. And then I saw her. Eleanor was standing across the room, laughing at something her companion had said. She was wearing a deep blue dress, simple and elegant, and she looked radiant, healthy. Happy in a way I'd never seen her when she was with me. She saw me too. I watched her freeze, her smile faltering for just a moment before she recovered. And then she made a decision, one I would never have expected. She walked toward me. Christopher. Her voice was calm, steady. It's been a long time. Eleanor. I struggled to find words. You look. Don't. She held up her hand, but there was no anger in it, just a gentle finality. I don't need compliments from you. I just wanted to say that I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're doing well. I stared at her. You're glad? I've had a lot of time to think, she said. A lot of time to process everything that happened. And I realized that holding on to anger was only hurting me. So I let it go. You let it go. I repeated the words like they were a foreign language. You let go of everything I did to you? I let go of the anger. She smiled, and it wasn't bitter. It was peaceful. Not the memory, not the lessons, just the anger. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw the woman I'd married in her eyes, the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd destroyed, the woman who'd rebuilt herself without me. I need to tell you something, I said. Something I should have told you years ago. Tell me. I never stopped loving you. The words came out raw, broken. I was just too much of a coward to admit it. I pushed you away because I was afraid of meeting you. And I spent the last 3 years regretting every single moment of it. She nodded slowly. I know. You know. I've always known. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. And I understand, Christopher, I understand why you did what you did. I understand the fear, the pride, the need to be in control. I've seen it in myself, too. Then why didn't you? Because understanding isn't the same as forgiving, and forgiving isn't the same as forgetting. She reached out and touched my arm, just for a moment. I loved you. I loved you so much that I let you destroy me, and I can't go back to that. I won't. I opened my mouth to argue, but she shook her head. I'm happy now, she said, genuinely happy. And I want you to be happy too, but I can't be the one to make you happy. I can't be anyone's crutch. Not anymore. She turned to walk away, then paused. Oh, and Christopher? She looked back at me, a small smile on her face. Ian knows about this conversation. He knows I'm here, and he's okay with it. I watched her walk away, and I felt something I'd never expected. Peace. Not the peace of resolution. Not the peace of reconciliation. Just the peace of knowing that the person I'd hurt the most had found a way to forgive me. Not for my sake, but for hers. I wanted to chase after her. I wanted to tell her that I'd changed, that I'd gotten sober, that I was different now. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Because Eleanor had already moved on. Not just from the marriage, from the wound I'd left. And my presence in her life was nothing but a reminder of a chapter she'd already closed. I didn't stay for the rest of the gala. I walked out to the parking lot, my hands in my pockets, my heart pounding, and I made a decision. I'd spent 3 years trying to get back what I'd lost, trying to prove I was different, trying to earn a forgiveness that was never going to come. But Eleanor had just shown me what real strength looked like. She'd let go of the anger. She'd stopped letting the past define her, and she'd walked away without looking back. Maybe I could do the same. The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just sat in the silence, letting the weight of the last hour settle on me. And when I got home, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my phone and called my therapist. I need help, I said. Help with what? With letting go. I took a breath. With learning how to stop fighting something I can't win. With becoming the kind of person who can move forward instead of backward. There was a long pause on the other end. Christopher, are you serious about this? More serious than I've ever been about anything. The next year was the hardest in my life. I went to therapy twice a week. I joined a support group for people struggling with addiction. I started running in the mornings, something I'd always hated. And slowly, painfully, I started to change. I still thought about Eleanor and I still dreamed about her sometimes. Still wondered what would have happened if I had made different choices. But the dream stopped hurting. The thoughts stopped being torture. They just were. I saw Eleanor again at the end of that year at a charity event for cancer research. She was there with Ian, her hand resting on his arm, her belly round with pregnancy. She was glowing, radiant, and when she saw me, she didn't flinch or avoid my gaze. She smiled. Christopher, I'm glad you came. Eleanor. I looked at her, then at Ian. Congratulations on all of it. Thank you. She touched her stomach, a gesture so natural that I knew it was already second nature. We're having a girl, Charlotte. I'm happy for you. I know you are. She reached out and took my hand, just for a moment. I'm happy for you too. Ian stepped forward, his expression neutral but not hostile. I want you to know, he said slowly, that I don't hate you. I used to, but I don't anymore. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, he shrugged, but I know how hard it is to change, and I know how hard you've been trying. I looked at him, this man who'd taken everything I'd thrown away and built something better with it, and I realized that I'd never hated him. I'd hated myself. Take care of her, I said. Always. Eleanor and Ian walked away, and I watched them go. I felt something I hadn't expected. Acceptance. Not the bitter acceptance of defeat. Not the grudging acceptance of loss. Just the quiet understanding that some things aren't meant to be fixed. I turned and walked back to my car, and I didn't look back. The lesson I'd learned was simple. I'd spent my whole life believing I was the victim, the wronged party, the man who'd been forced into a marriage he didn't want, and then blamed when he couldn't make it work. But the truth was different. I'd been the one who'd pushed her away. I'd been the one who'd chosen pride over love. I'd been the one who'd spent years pretending I didn't care when I cared more than anything. Eleanor had never needed saving. She needed someone who saw her as she was, not as a transaction, not as a stepping stone, not as a woman who would always be there, waiting for me to notice. She needed someone who deserved her. And I'd finally realized that I never had been that someone. I didn't marry again. Not because I was waiting for Eleanor, not because I was holding on to hope, just because I'd finally learned what it meant to be alone. Not lonely alone.to live with myself and be okay with who I was. I threw myself into my work, into charity, into the things I'd neglected when I was chasing the wrong things. And slowly, over the years, I found something I'd never expected. Contentment. The last time I saw Eleanor, she was 52 years old. I was at a bookstore, of all places, browsing the shelves in the back. She walked in with her daughter, a beautiful girl of about 13, the spitting image of her mother. They were laughing about something, their heads bent together, lost in their own world. I watched them for a long moment, and then, as if she sensed my gaze, Eleanor looked up and met my eyes. She smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes, and then she nodded, just once, just a small gesture, and turned back to her daughter. I nodded back, and I walked out of the bookstore. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. I was 57 years old, and I'd stopped checking my mailbox with any expectation of surprise. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work, charity work, the occasional dinner with friends. I'd made peace with my solitude, learned to find joy in small things. The envelope was cream-colored, elegant, with Eleanor's handwriting on the front. I recognized it immediately. I'd seen it on 1,000 notes and cards and letters, back when we were married. The sight of it made my chest tighten. Christopher. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Her handwriting was shakier than I remembered, the letters a little larger, a little less precise. Dear Christopher, I'm writing this because I've been thinking about the past, about us, about all the things we never said to each other. I want you to know that I forgive you, not because you deserve it. I don't think that's really the point. I forgive you because I've spent the last 20 years learning that forgiveness is something you give yourself, and I've finally given it to myself. I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer 6 months ago. The doctors say it's advanced. I'm not going to fight it this time. I'm tired, Christopher. Not tired of living, just tired of fighting. I'm not writing to make you feel guilty. I'm writing because I want you to know the truth. The truth I never told you. When we first met, I thought you were the most broken person I'd ever seen, and I loved you for it. I loved your brokenness because I recognized it in myself. I thought if I could save you, I could save myself. That's why I stayed, even when you pushed me away, even when you hurt me, even when I knew you didn't love me the way I loved you. I stayed because I didn't know how to leave. But I learned, and I'm grateful for that lesson, even though it came with so much pain. I'm grateful for Ian, for my daughter, for the life I built after you. I'm grateful for the years I had, the moments I cherished, the love I found when I stopped looking for it in the wrong places. But I'm also grateful for you, for the time we had, for the lessons you taught me, even the hard ones, for the fact that you showed me what I didn't want so I could recognize what I did. I hope you've found peace, Christopher. I hope you've learned to let go of the past. I hope you've learned to be kind to yourself. I have. With love. Eleanor. I read the letter 3 times. The first time, I couldn't breathe. The second time, I was crying. The third time, I was smiling. Not because I was happy, I was devastated, but because Eleanor had given me a gift. A gift I'd never asked for and never deserved. She'd forgiven me, not for my sake, but for hers. And in doing so, she'd given me permission to forgive myself. I didn't go to her funeral. I'd thought about it. I'd even bought a plane ticket. But at the last minute, I canceled. I didn't want to intrude on her family's grief. I didn't want to make it about me. Instead, I sat in my apartment and looked at old photographs. Eleanor at our wedding, looking beautiful and uncertain. Eleanor on her honeymoon, laughing at something I'd said. Eleanor in the kitchen of our penthouse, cooking dinner, her back to me. I'd never appreciated those moments. I'd never realized how lucky I was to have them. The months after Eleanor's death were strange. I thought I'd be sad, and I was, but there was something else underneath the sadness, a kind of peace. A quiet acceptance that I'd been part of something beautiful, even if I hadn't recognized it at the time. I started writing again, not letters, journal entries, thoughts about my life, my choices, my regrets that I wrote about Eleanor, about Bella, about all the women I loved and lost. I wrote about my childhood, my father, the shame I'd carried my whole life. It was painful, it was raw, but it was also healing. A year after Eleanor's death, I got a call from her daughter. Mr. Sterling? The voice was young, hesitant. My name is Charlotte, Eleanor's daughter. I know who you are. I tried to keep my voice steady. I saw you once, at a bookstore. You were about 13. I remember that day. There was a pause. My mother told me about you. She said you were a good man who made bad choices. She said you were trying to be better. She said that. She said a lot of things. Charlotte's voice was soft, gentle. She said you were the first person who made her feel seen. Even when you didn't know how to love her, she saw you trying. I felt tears prick at my eyes. I don't deserve. I'm not calling to make you feel guilty. She cut me off. I'm calling because my mother left you something. In her will, she wanted you to have it. I drove to the house Eleanor had shared with Ian for the last 20 years. It was a beautiful place, a farmhouse in the country, surrounded by gardens and trees. I could see the life she'd built here, the family she'd created. It made my heart ache, but it also brought me comfort. Charlotte met me at the door. She was in her early 20s, with her mother's eyes and her mother's smile. She looked at me with curiosity, not judgment. She's in the study, she said. I'll show you. The study was small but warm, filled with books and photographs. I recognized a few of them. Photos from Eleanor's wedding to Ian, photos of their daughter at various ages. I saw the life she lived, and I felt a surge of gratitude that she'd found the happiness she deserved. Charlotte handed me a small box. She said you'd know what it meant. I opened it, and inside was a ring. My mother's ring. The one I'd given to Eleanor on our wedding day. The one she'd kept even after the divorce. I turned it over in my hands, and I understood. Eleanor had kept it all these years, not because she still loved me. She'd made it clear that she'd moved on, but because she'd recognized what it meant. She'd recognized that I'd given her something precious, even if I hadn't known it at the time. Thank you, I said to Charlotte, for giving this to me. She wanted you to have it. Charlotte paused. She also wanted you to know something. She said it was the most important thing she ever learned. What was that? She said love isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to try. She said you tried, Christopher. You didn't always succeed, but you tried, and that meant something to her. I drove home that night with the ring in my pocket. I thought about Eleanor, about the life we'd shared, the life we'd lost, the life she'd built without me. I thought about all the mistakes I'd made, all the ways I'd hurt her, all the times I'd been too proud to admit I was wrong. But I also thought about the forgiveness she'd given me, the gift she'd offered, even when I didn't deserve it. I'd spent my whole life believing I was unworthy of love, that my father's shame was my own, that I'd never be good enough for anyone. But Eleanor had shown me something different. She'd shown me that love wasn't something you earned. It was something you accepted, something you let yourself receive, even when you felt you didn't deserve it. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I went to my father's grave. I'd never visited it. I never wanted it. I'd spent my whole life hating the man who'd abandoned me, resenting the name he'd left behind. But standing there, looking at the headstone, I felt something shift inside me. He'd been broken too. Broken and ashamed and unable to love the way he should have. I'd spent my life trying to be the opposite of him, and I'd ended up making the same mistakes anyway. But I could do something he'd never done. I could learn to forgive. I started with myself. It wasn't easy. IT was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Harder than quitting drinking, harder than therapy, harder than any of the other changes I'd made. Forgiving yourself isn't a decision. It's a process to slow, painful, relentless process of letting go. But I kept at it. Day after day, month after month, did I learn to be kind to myself, did I learn to accept my failures without letting them define me. I learned to see the man I was, not just the man I'd been. And eventually I started to believe that I deserved happiness. I met someone. Her name was Margaret, and she was a volunteer at the cancer research charity I'd been working with. She was 58, divorced, with 2 grown children, and a laugh that made me smile. She wasn't Eleanor. She didn't try to be. She was just herself, and I loved her for it. We started dating slowly, carefully. I've been burned before, and I didn't want to rush into anything I wasn't ready for. But Margaret was patient. She understood. She'd been hurt too. I don't need you to be perfect, she told me one night. I just need you to be present. The letter from Eleanor had taught me something. I'd spent my whole life running from the past, running from the shame and the fear and the guilt. But running doesn't work. It just wears you out. The only way to move forward is to go through it. So I went through it. I let myself feel the pain. I let myself mourn the love I'd lost. And I let myself find a new love to replace it. Not a replacement for Eleanor. Nothing could ever replace her, but a new love, a different love, a love that didn't require me to be someone I wasn't. Margaret and I got married 2 years later. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends, and I thought about Eleanor a lot that day, about the life we'd shared, the life I'd lost, the lessons she taught me, but I didn't feel sad. I felt grateful. Grateful for the time we'd had. Grateful for the forgiveness she'd given me. Grateful for the love I'd found again. I never stopped thinking about Eleanor, but I stopped dwelling on the regret. I stopped wishing I could change the past. I accepted what had happened, and I let it make me better. And whenever I felt myself slipping back into old patterns, whenever I felt the need to push someone away or to pretend I didn't care, I thought of Eleanor. I thought of the letter she'd written, the forgiveness she'd offered, the life she'd built after me. And I did better. The final lesson was simple. Love isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to try. It's about letting go of the past and embracing the future. It's about learning to forgive, not just others, but yourself. I'd spent my whole life running from those lessons, but in the end, they found me anyway. I think that's what Eleanor would have wanted.